Sounds good. Well, let me introduce Sabina Gifford. She's a biologist with the New York Water Science Center, and I believe that falls under US Geological Survey. Is that right, Sabina?
Yes.
So she got her undergraduate degrees from Stanford before she got her master's from New Hampshire, University of New Hampshire. And she's been studying the lakes in New England and New York since 2012. So I'm going to let her tell us more about what she's found with her research and how it concerns all of us. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sabina.
Thanks, Sarah. Um, so share. Success? Okay. Um, yeah, so thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you all today. As Sarah mentioned, I've been interested and fascinated by cyanobacteria since I started working for an aquatic plant consultant company in Connecticut in 2012. While we were doing all of our aquatic plant surveys, we encountered more and more lakes that were experiencing cyanobacteria issues. And so I decided that I needed to go back to grad school to figure out more um, about that. And so I went to UNH and did some research there and then moved on and was actually able to keep doing what I was doing in grad school, but at USGS. And so since 2020, I've been researching cyanobacteria blooms and uh, also called harmful algae blooms. We'll talk a little bit more about why that's a little bit of a misnomer later. But yeah, so I've been doing that since 2020 in New York. And I am so happy to be speaking with this group tonight. Sarah found me because my daughter has been going to the Tots Exploring Nature or whatever it's called at the park in Schenectady and has loved it. And so we got to chatting, and I thought I would tell you about cyanobacteria. Despite the lofty title of understanding cyanobacteria, we are not going to actually be able to understand cyanobacteria in an hour talk. There is so much that scientists who study it for their lifetime still do not understand about these organisms. But I just sort of, I'm hoping to give you guys a little bit of an overview of what are cyanobacteria and why we might get worried when we see a lot of them, and maybe a little bit about what you can do if you either see a cyanobacteria bloom or to try to prevent a cyanobacteria bloom. So, uh, cyanobacteria are some of the oldest known photoautotrophs, which is just a big long word that means that they produce their own food using light. So they're photosynthesizers. They are responsible for oxygenating the atmosphere. They think around 3.6 billion years ago. So they've been around for a long time. Um, and they are a normal component of water in a variety of places and bottom dwelling biological communities around the world. They are ubiquitous and cosmopolitan, meaning that they're everywhere, and many of the different species of cyanobacteria, you can find the same species in lakes in New York and in Russia and in Peru, and so they have a broad diversity around the world. And we're going to be focusing today on cyanobacteria in lakes and rivers, but I just want to mention that cyanobacteria are not confined to those locations. They've been found growing inside the roots of cycad trees, as you can see in that upper left photo. They when I was growing up, it was always Annie algae met Freddy fungus, and then they took a liken to each other on a rock. But recently, they discovered that many times there's actually a third player in the game, Cindy Cyanobacteria. So cyanobacteria are a part of a lot of lichen symbioses. Um, and they also are responsible for the beautiful different colors in the Grand Prismatic Spring in Yellowstone and all of those hot springs. The colors are different species of cyanobacterial mat growing on the rocks in those hot spring environments. And they also grow in the crusts, or they grow into these crusts in desert environments. And so when it rains, then they, you know, flourish and do what they do, but they can survive the arid environments there as well. So they're extremophiles. Basically, cyanobacteria everywhere. So because they've been around for so long, they've had a lot of time to develop some really neat adaptations. And the first is that they form colonies that have different specialized cells that do different jobs. And so you can see in this picture, this is a colony of Dolichospermum, which is a type of cyanobacteria. And these cells here are heterocysts. Oh, you can't really see the label, but they're called heterocytes, actually. They're called heterocytes now. And they are able to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, just like a pea or a legume. And so that means that they can harvest their own nutrients from the air, which might give them an edge in some low nutrient lakes. This type of cyanobacteria and many others also have the ability to produce these aconites, which are resting cells, which means that they form them often in the fall or early winter, and then they sink to the bottom of the lake. And then when conditions are more favorable for growth, then they can reform a whole new colony. And so that's one of the ways that they reproduce, like in the spring. And another fun adaptation in general, cyanobacteria do proliferate in warmer waters. And the cyanobacteria blooms that we'll be talking about more later do tend to occur more frequently in late summer and early fall in kind of our temperate climates. Some species, however, like this Planktothrix rubescens, do have the ability to survive and thrive under the ice. And so this is an example of a bloom in Canada that is just pink. It's pink because of phycoerythrin pigments that we'll touch on in a minute. But they bloom under the ice and are, living just fine, just living their lives. Yeah. And so this is just a chart showing that they have higher growth rates at higher temperatures than a lot of other phytoplankton species. And so with climate change expecting to increase water temperatures, we expect to see more cyanobacteria in the future. Another neat cyanobacteria adaptation is they have a bunch of accessory antenna pigments, like phycoerythrin, that's the pink one, and phycocyanin, which is more of a blue-green pigment. And those help funnel the photons to the photosynthesis center, which expands the wavelengths of light that these cyanobacteria can harvest, which means that they can thrive in niches that aren't necessarily accessible to other types of phytoplankton. So, for example, during my master's at UNH, I studied uh, the deep water layers of cyanobacteria that hung out in this kind of transition zone between the warmer surface waters and the cooler bottom waters in lakes. And so these cyanobacteria were surviving at very low light levels. And yeah, they have another really cool adaptation that they can regulate their buoyancy. And so the type of species that I was studying in my master's was Planktothrix isothrix. And those ones can form large aggregates and rise through the surface in the early morning and sink back down during the day. And so it just allows them to kind of control the amount of light that they're getting to maybe access some of the colder, more nutrient rich water in the bottom of lakes during the whatever period they're down there. And then, they just have the ability to control their buoyancy, which means that they don't sink out of the water column like many other algae do. So, I've been throwing around a lot of scientific names for cyanobacteria at you already, but these are some of the main ones to know: Annie, Fanny, and Mike, and Planktothrix. So these are some of the most common cyanobacteria that we see in lakes in the Northeast. And all of these common cyanobacteria can produce toxins. We call them cyanotoxins, and I'll talk about them more in a minute. And one of the struggles with studying and from a risk assessment perspective is that you can't always tell if a cyanobacteria bloom is toxic just by looking at it, or even if you know the community composition. So even if you know this, that the community contains one of these genera that are known to produce toxins. So this is Dolichospermum that was formerly known as Anabina, and Microcystis, and Aphanizomenon, and Planktothrix. And yeah, and they're beautiful. But they're also sometimes toxic. And so there's three main groups of toxins, cyanotoxins, that these organisms are able to produce. They can produce really a suite of different compounds. But the three main groups are hepatotoxins, which are liver toxins, and some of the common liver toxins are microcystins, which, as you might guess, are produced by Microcystis, and cylindrospermopsins and nodularin. There's also neurotoxins, which are usually more fast acting, and those can be the anatoxins and saxitoxins. And each one of these groups can have a million different what are called congeners of the toxin within that group. So there's 300 plus congeners of microcystins, and each one has a slightly different toxicity to humans and other things. And then there's dermatotoxins, which are skin toxins, and those, lipopolysaccharides and lyngbiotoxins are the ones in there. So the different cyanobacteria groups can produce more than one toxin, and they also can produce what are called taste and odor compounds. which are what you might get if your drinking water has like a musty smell, then that might be the geosmin and methoisoborneol. I think they actually talked about that in the sewage talk last month, or whenever it was. But yeah, so those are some of the taste and odor compounds that can be produced by cyanobacteria. And so you can see that they can produce more than one type of toxin. Dolichospermum can produce cylindrospermopsin, microcystin, anatoxin, and saxitoxin, as well as geosmin and the dermatotoxins. Yeah. And so, you just, yeah. The other problem is that we still don't know why cyanobacteria produce toxins. So we know that sometimes these groups can produce toxins, but they don't always produce toxins, and we don't know why. It's a mystery, and it's one of the things that makes studying cyanobacteria really fun, because there's so much that we don't know. These guys have been around for so long that it's possible. One of the theories is that it's a response to grazing by zooplankton, but that one hasn't really taken off. We haven't found a ton of evidence for that. There's also a theory that it's that higher growth rates produce more toxin production, because if they're growing more, then they're storing more like nitrogen and other things in these secondary metabolites, or it's some other primary function that we don't know yet. So it's an area that is an active area of study. But for us, it doesn't really matter. Well, I mean, it does really matter why they produce toxin, but we don't know, just looking at a cyanobacteria bloom, whether or not it's toxic. So I've been talking a lot about cyanobacteria blooms, but what is a bloom? So in a lake, it can be a completely natural phenomenon, or it can be caused by some sort of environmental imbalance related to disturbance or human influence or other factors that promote a rapid growth of cyanobacteria and an abundance. So colloquially, they're called harmful algal blooms, or HABs. That name kind of came out of marine harmful algal blooms, like red tide is actually caused by an alga, like a plant, a single-celled plant. But cyanobacteria are not eukaryotic, they're bacteria, and they're not technically considered algae. And so, they are, but we still call them HABs or cyanoHABs, because HABs is the name that people know. And so, yeah, and then just reiterating, not all blooms are harmful, and not all harmful blooms are toxic. So a bloom, when you have a ton of cyanobacteria or a ton of algae, if it dies and decomposes, then that can use up oxygen and create hypoxia. It can, there are all sorts of different ways that a bloom can have negative consequences beyond just the toxins. And each state differs, both for recreational and drinking water guidelines and thresholds. So we haven't really decided on what's safe for everyone. Each state has kind of their own thresholds for when they will close a beach, or trigger a drinking water alert. The Toledo water crisis in 2014 was caused by a cyanobacteria bloom in Lake Erie. And but there's no federal standards for cyanotoxins. And so we have kind of a recreational health advisory threshold for microcystin and for cylindrospermopsin, but those are the only two toxins that have even a health advisory threshold, which is different than like regulations for deeming a water body impaired due to cyanotoxins, for example. These cyanobacteria blooms are really hard to predict when they're going to happen. I said earlier that they will often happen in the late summer and early fall. However, this bloom that happened in, I think, 2022, I should know this, in Lake George, happened in November. And this was almost exclusively Dolichospermum, which is one of the genera that bloom at weird times. They can also occasionally bloom in the spring. And cyanobacteria blooms are very difficult to remove because they, for reasons that we'll talk about a little bit later. So what causes cyanobacteria blooms or cyanobacteria habs? This is a schematic that just sort of talks about sources of nutrients. So like any photosynthesizing thing in your garden, things that cause plants in your garden to grow are nutrients, light, and the same is true for cyanobacteria. They like warm, calm surface waters. They are fed by increased nutrients due to atmospheric deposition or wastewater effluent or agricultural runoff. And, these in-lake nutrient cycling can also contribute nutrients that feed cyanobacteria blooms. And so even if you do fix all external sources of nutrients, then you can still have internal sources of nutrients that can feed cyanobacteria blooms. So they thrive with nutrients and light. Lakes that have higher nutrients are more likely to experience cyanobacteria blooms. However, as I talked about before, they are present in low nutrient water bodies like Lake George and the Finger Lakes. We don't fully understand why they occur. It's often after periods of calm, warm temperatures, but again, not always. And there's also interannual variability between lakes. So I've just pulled out, this is from the DEC's report on HABs. These are cyanobacteria. And when I say HABs in this context, I'm referring to freshwater cyanobacteria blooms. There are very few algae blooms that happen in freshwater that are that produce toxins. Harmful algal bloom. In this context, I'm referring to cyanobacteria blooms. So this is Iroquois Lake. That's the one that's out in front of the in the park in Schenectady, and you can see that it has had blooms, suspected blooms in 2015 and 2019, and a confirmed bloom in 2016. There's also several other reports that go past 2019. And we'll talk about those a little bit more later. But you can see that there are years when no blooms are reported. And this is a little bit of a bad example, because just because a bloom isn't reported doesn't mean it didn't happen. But there is interannual variability between lakes. Sometimes lakes bloom and sometimes they don't. And it depends on a variety of factors. So, cyanobacteria blooms can also have many different distributions throughout the water column. We've already talked about a couple of these. The D was what I did my master's thesis on, those metalimnetic or deep water blooms, where there's like a layer of cyanobacteria at depth. And this is one of the more common ones, where you'll see a scum form at the surface and go on shore. And this is we already talked about this one too, how they sometimes bloom under ice. Can you see my mouse, by the way, when I'm waving it around vaguely?
Oh, wait, wave it again.
Wave, wave, wave. No?
I don't see it.
Let me see if I can. I don't
Oh,
know if.
wait, yes, yes, I do. I see it
Yeah?
now.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Okay. Great. I should probably figure out the little pointer thing, but um, I'm not going to worry about that. Yes. So, yeah, the only way that you would know that something like that you had a bloom that is kind of shaped like option C or D is if you went out to the lake and lowered like a multi-parameter sonde or something that could sense phycocyanin or chlorophyll. That's one of the few ways to detect something like that. You wouldn't be able to tell from the surface necessarily. So this is just a graphic showing how it's possible for crazy low nutrient lakes like Skinny Atlas to form cyanobacteria scums that can be super toxic. And so, the Finger Lakes are huge. And so there's lots of area, but they're in the open deep water. Cyanobacteria are very sparsely dispersed. However, if you have a period of like big wind that's mixing cyanobacteria through a lot of the water column, and then the wind slackens off and it accumulates more in the epilimnion, and then you have a period of calm with no wind, then the cyanobacteria can rise to the surface and form a little bit thicker of a layer there. And then if there's light wind, then they can accumulate on one side of the lake. And, you have, in this area, you have a much higher risk level, much greater potential for toxins. And yeah. And this is a graphic of, or this is a video of a camera at the pier in Skinny Atlas that just kind of gives a visual for how ephemeral and patchy these blooms can be. So this is over the course of, I think, 24 hours in September of 2024, taking an image every hour. And so it starts at the images started around 7 o'clock. You can't see when it's dark. But a cyanobacteria accumulation, a bloom, has formed in this area overnight. And, we'll see it kind of linger and then dissipate really quickly. And you can see by the end of the day, the water is clear and you can see the rocks again. And so, there's uh, the these blooms can be really, really patchy and short-lived, but they can also be persistent and go through the whole summer in some lakes. So now I thought that it would be a good idea to give kind of some examples of what cyanobacteria blooms might look like, because they do look very different. And we've already seen a couple instances of this, but the appearance obviously varies, but many of them are bright green or blue green in color. If you have a really thick mat, then you can get some of those and it starts to like die off, then you can get some really blue or white patches. And thick scums or accumulations might look like spilled paint. That's what we usually describe it as. And they might be accompanied by an earthy, musty, septic or sulfurous odors. And so these are some other examples of what blooms might look like in a low nutrient lake. This is an example from New Hampshire. You often see this kind of bathtub ring of cyanobacteria around the edge of the lake. And sometimes it's well mixed in wavy or choppy conditions, and so it just has this kind of green tinge, and sometimes it can accumulate on the surface and look more like that spilled paint. So there's a wide variety of appearance and scales, from isolated surface scums all the way to pervasive, dense, lake-wide accumulations. And there's also a couple of less common bloom appearances that I've come across. So this is from my master's thesis. This is one of the lakes that had that deep water layer of planktothrix. And we would see these crazily colored globules on the surface of the lake. And then this was another really cool example at a beaver pond. These are nodules of Nostoc, which is another type of cyanobacteria. And they looked like little peas. It was crazy. And those are each a colony that's like stuffed full of wriggly little cyanobacteria colonies. So we've talked mostly about lakes so far, but severe cyanobacteria blooms have been reported in large rivers. When rivers act like lakes, you're more likely to get cyanobacteria blooms. So flow-controlled rivers like the Ohio River, in agricultural areas with a lot of nutrients, the rivers, if they aren't flowing very fast, are basically lakes. And we've also seen, so there was actually this year, there was a bloom, a cyanobacteria bloom in the Hudson River in September. We had a pretty dry year, and in some of the lower flowing areas, tributaries to the Hudson, they think were sort of seeding this bloom in the river. And so one of the studies that I got a chance to work on was on the Hudson, not during the cyanobacteria bloom, unfortunately, but we were doing longitudinal surveys from the dam in Troy all the way down to Yonkers in a day, with a flow-through multi-parameter sonde mapping the chlorophyll and phycocyan and fluorescence in the river, on days that there was a satellite overpass. And so we were trying to develop a model for sensing the cyanobacteria blooms and or algae blooms from space. And so that is one of the things that is an area of active research is, it's really hard to collect enough data on the ground to know where cyanobacteria blooms are happening. And so as much as we can do from space, it might give us a little bit of a better idea of when to go out and sample, or give us a better idea of what is blooming when. And another river, another thing that we've been hearing more and more about recently is blooms of benthic cyanobacteria in rivers. So benthic means that it's growing on rocks or other substrate on the bottom of the rivers. And these the cyanobacteria that's growing benthically appears to be producing quite a bit of toxins. And so, there were, this is an example of work that was done in the Eel River in California. But I think it was last summer, I'm not actually sure. There were several, there have been issues with the river in Zion National Park as well. So there are several things that look like cyanobacteria that are in fact not. And so knowing what those look like is almost just as important as knowing what a cyanobacteria bloom looks like. So there's two small aquatic plants, Lemna and Wolfia. They're watermeal and duckweed. And they will often form things that look very similar to paint scum. In the farm ponds around me, they're often covered. And those are not toxic, not toxin producers, nothing to be worried about. They are just plants. And this one on the right, I could have sworn was a cyanobacteria bloom, but when we took it back and looked at it under the microscope, it was these euglena that were just darting around all crazy. They were moving faster than I'd seen anything move in a really long time. So that's not cyanobacteria, but it looks like it. And this on the left is actually a picture that I took from the lake in Schenectady in Central Park. And you can see here that there is some of that lemna and a little bit of wolfia, that watermeal in there, growing in amongst the coontail, which is the bigger aquatic plant that's under the water. And so that's not cyanobacteria. And so we've sort of briefly touched on the fact that these cyanobacteria do produce toxins, but why are these blooms a concern? So the main reason, we tend to focus a lot on the human health portion of the hazard, which is, because we're humans, and our health is important to us. And there have been, the reason that we're concerned about these toxins is that there have been illnesses and deaths that were due to cyanobacteria toxins in very rare circumstances. Like one of the main studies that, talks about the deaths that occur was in dialysis patients who had high levels of microcystin go through their dialysis, and a lot of them died, and it was bad. But that is a very rare circumstance that you wouldn't run into in frequently. There can be multiple different exposure routes to these toxins, recreation, if you're going swimming and you're drinking water is another source. um, and foods, aerosols, and skin contact. And so the a lot of these are not well understood, the risks to human health that are posed by the kind of combination between the toxin level, the congener of toxin, the exposure route, and the kind of levels of exposure. We don't really understand what is dangerous yet. And so that's one of the reasons that there isn't federal guidelines on that beyond the kind of health advisory that was put out by the EPA. For only two of the toxins, though, right? So there's that whole suite of things that cyanobacteria can produce. But yeah, there's a lot that still isn't known. And there are also ecological health risks due to degraded water quality. We're going to talk about some food web effects in a minute. I'm actually going to start going faster because I have too many slides. So, and there's also economic consequences. So pets can be especially vulnerable, particularly dogs, because they are often swimming and drinking kind of scuzzier water than we would be comfortable drinking. And they also have a tendency to ingest the cyanobacteria mats, those benthic mats, and there could be really high levels of toxins in those. And so there have been several dog deaths. I see them pop up every once in a while. So if there is a cyanobacteria bloom, keep your pets and toddlers. I have two young children who I try to keep away from the cyanobacteria blooms and the benthic mats as well. So this is just another example of the symptoms that can happen with the in concert with the health effects. So the neurotoxins are much faster acting, and they can lead. They're the ones that usually cause the deaths in dogs. And so it can be like within minutes after consumption of the cyanobacteria mat that they'll go into seizures and then paralysis and die. Like I said, we don't know by looking at a bloom whether toxins are present. So if you see a bloom, then it's a good idea to stay out of the water. And an example of the ecological food web side of things, there's been a lot of really cool research done by Susie Wild and her group in Georgia about they found a new type of cyanobacteria that grows epiphytically on hydrilla, which is an invasive aquatic plant. And that cyanobacteria produces a toxin that is the cause of avian vacuolar myelinopathy, which has killed a bunch of eagles in the South. And it's a food web pathway to death. So the cyanobacteria grows on this plant, which is eaten by coots, which are eaten by bald eagles, and the toxin accumulates as you go up the food web, and the eagles show symptoms of confusion, and then they die. And then this is just a repetition of the fact that we do see economic consequences of cyanobacteria blooms as well, that include decreased recreation revenue and decreased property values, an increase in drinking water treatment costs if you have to do more filtration to get your cyanobacteria out of your drinking water before you distribute it. And then mitigation or management costs too are also extensive. And so I'm going to quickly go through this. This is another example of some work that we've done locally. we've seen a lot of low nutrient lakes like Lake George, and in this case, Moreau Lake, that have been experiencing cyanobacteria blooms recently. And, we don't know why, but we're still discovering why. And um, but it does cause that loss of recreational opportunities at a state park, because they've had beach closures for these blooms of gliotrichia, which is one of my favorite cyanobacteria, because it looks like weird little craft supplies, weird little puffballs. And it's a common bloom former in low nutrient lakes. And it has all sorts of like unique, fun adaptations. So it can store phosphorus in its colony and bring it from the bottom up to the surface. And so, that can, and then they sometimes release it, which they think can cause food web effects for other types of algae that can then use that phosphorus to grow. So it has impacts for nutrient cycling, and they are also they do produce toxin, but it's unclear how much toxin they produce. And it also so happens that they were the first cyanobacteria bloom I ever saw in Copic Lake in 2012. And so in order to sort of test and see whether these blooms of gliotrichia that started happening in Moreau Lake in 2018 were kind of an occasional phenomenon that happened sort of cyclically or something like that, we took a sediment core using this really cool box core, and took a look at the sediment record using a bunch of different methods to see if we could get kind of a history of gliotrichia blooms in Moreau Lake. And we didn't find a lot of evidence that the blooms had been happening before 2018 cyclically. So it seems like it's kind of a newish phenomenon. There was also a gliotrichia bloom while we were collecting this sample. And they look like, so gliotrichia, when they bloom, they look like snow in the water. Okay, so in the last, 5 minutes or so, we've got a cyanobacteria bloom in our lake. What do we do? And so there's several things that you can do to try to prevent cyanobacteria blooms. There's like nutrient reduction strategies that you can do in the watershed. So reducing the amount of nutrient, it's largely when we're talking about mitigation and management, we're talking about reducing nutrients. And that works up to a point. It doesn't always work. Sometimes you get different cyanobacteria blooms, like, you'll go from having a microcystis bloom to having a gliotrichia bloom when the water clears up. And so that can be frustrating to people sometimes. Yeah, but these are still always good things to do. Good septic system maintenance is always a good thing to do, and stormwater management activities are really important for reducing the nutrients that get into the lake that can stimulate a bloom. And then there's several in-lake management options that are used. Some of them are not used in New York, and a lot of them have side effects of their use. So, for example, copper has been used for a long time. Copper sulfate has been used for a long time to control blooms, like over 100 years. It's been used to control blooms, and I think that one is one of the ones that has detrimental impacts to mussels. So there's several others. Alum does as well, and so there's give and take and cost benefits to using all of these things. So one of the things that you can do is there's ways to report cyanobacteria blooms. So now that you guys are all experts in what cyanobacteria blooms look like, if you see one, then you can report it. So this is the DEC harmful algal bloom, cyanobacteria bloom reporting tool. The website is here. There's a QR code here. The website is not up yet. It only comes online during the kind of recreation growing season for cyanobacteria. So if you find a bloom under the ice, there's nowhere to report it. I mean, you can tell me, please tell me, because I want to go see it. But yeah, this is a good place to report cyanobacteria blooms if you see them. And then I just wanted to take a minute to look at Iroquois Lake specifically. So there have been 7 confirmed bloom reports at Iroquois Lake. It does bloom. The most recent report was in 2021. So, it might not bloom badly frequently. However, I've found that the lack of reports does not necessarily mean that cyanobacteria blooms are not occurring. This is an example of a picture that I took last summer. And so here you can see more of that wolfia, but this bit here, it's a little bit darker green than the rest of it. I have not taken a look at it under a microscope, but if I were a betting human, I would bet that that's some cyanobacteria in there. And so not necessarily a bloom, right? That's just a small accumulation, but it is, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. And it's just a matter of kind of determining the risk that you're comfortable with. And there's also several opportunities for volunteer monitoring. There's the Citizen Science Lake Assessment Program in New York, which is kind of a heavier commitment where you're kind of going out every 2 weeks or every month to a lake and doing some water quality testing. But there's also the Bloom Watch app and the Cyanoscope, which are both EPA run citizen science opportunities. And this is an example of a HABscope that was designed by one of my colleagues that you can make for, $30 out of plywood and a closet light. And then you can kind of use your phone. It's a microscope. It's a microscope. And what is she uses a backwards facing security camera lens for the microscope lens. But you can use your phone to look at cyanobacteria under the microscope. And then you can post it to iNaturalist. You can send photos to that cyanobacteria bloom reporting thing with the DEC. Yeah.
Sabina,
or you can send them to me. Here's my
would you be able
my
to
email.
send me that last slide that has the citizen science information at some time later?
Yes, of course.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is recorded, right? So you can just scroll to that.
Actually, you're right.
Yes,
I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. That's why I included so many like QR codes and other things to learn more, is because I thought people might want to go back and continue the lifelong learning. Okay, so I'm happy to take any questions. This is a photo from the lake in Central Park, which is a notorious cyanobacteria bloomer that we did some work on in 2024 and 2023.
This is Iroquois Lake?
No, this is the lake in Central Park. So it's the one with all
you're
the
talking about
paddle boats.
City?
New York
Central
City.
Park okay.
Sorry. They are the same. You're so right. Yes, no, Central Park in New York City.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, maybe everybody can just unmute themselves and either speak up or raise your hand if we can see you.
I have a question.
Okay. Is that
are
Cheryl?
are these bacteria blooms more likely in non-flowing water than flowing water?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they
I
are.
mean,
They do exist in rivers, and there's more. The more we look for them in those benthic mats, the more we're finding them. But the kind of pelagic green paint scum definitely do occur more in lakes than rivers.
well, I have a fish tank and I get bacteria blooms in my fish tank, so
Do you?
I do water
So
changes
so
and all that
there's
too.
so one of the things that I didn't mention, which I totally should have, and I meant to stick a slide in, there's um, filamentous green algae is one of the things that often grows in fish tanks and in lakes, and that's one of the lookalikes for cyanobacteria. But you can tell them apart uh, using like the stick test. So if you stick a stick in and the algae kind of drapes over the stick, then that's filamentous green algae. Um, but if it doesn't, if it like, if you can't scoop it with a stick, then that's more likely to be cyanobacteria. And that's one of the
Uh,
kind of quick tests.
Sabina, if you stop sharing screen, then we can all
Yes,
see each
sorry.
other. It's
Yes,
easier to
of
see
course.
who's raising their hand
Okay.
or speaking up.
Sabina, this is Peter Tabison. Is phosphorus still the main villain, or are there finding other contributors?
Phosphorus is still the main villain. Nitrogen is also, a player for sure, and potentially more of a player in determining toxicity
Mhm.
than phosphorus. So, like, phosphorus might, this isn't exactly the way that it goes, but phosphorus might determine how much cyanobacteria you have, and nitrogen might determine how toxic it is. But not always. So, yeah. Yes.
Hand.
Nancy, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, is it called bloom because it's actually a flowering part of the life of the organism?
No, no, it's just called a bloom because it's like a flourishing condition.
Okay.
It could all just as easily be called a boom. It's a cyanobacteria boom. um, but yeah, it's not, they don't have flowers. They're much more primitive than that. Yeah.
Because I was thinking that if it has a flower, there'll be a seed or something to follow. No.
Well,
Okay.
so those aconites, the resting cells, are very similar to seeds. They're like
All
proto
right.
seeds. They're a resting stage that goes onto the bottom of the lake and then will form a new colony,
Okay.
oftentimes in the spring. And so, it's
If
similar.
hmm.
John, did you have a question?
I did. What magnification do you need on a like a stereoscope to be able to identify the different types?
So, cyanobacteria range widely in size. Some of those bigger colonies that I was showing today, you can almost see with a dissecting scope, but usually, you can see them. I like 20x magnification, but in order to identify them, they'll sometimes go all the way up to 1,000. An oil immersion. And then there's also, I didn't talk about it, but there are these things called picocyanobacteria, which we know very little about, but we know that they are everywhere and there's a lot of them. And they are, as the name implies, pico, they're very, very, very small. And so you need either a fluorescence microscope or one of those oil immersion ones to be able to even see them. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Are there certain aquatic plants that help prevent the bacteria blooms?
So this is an area of study that I am absolutely fascinated by because I did that consulting job studying aquatic plants. So it seems to be that there's okay, the colloquial wisdom is that there's kind of a tipping point where you have a lake that's either dominated by aquatic plants or by cyanobacteria, or or pelagic algae. It doesn't have to be cyanobacteria, but it often is. And so, if your lake is clear enough, then you can have aquatic plants that will stabilize the soil. It doesn't necessarily matter which aquatic plant. There's some evidence that give me a sec. I keep wanting to say microcystis, but it's not microcystis. The plant Myriophyllum. Nope, it's not going to come to me.
Hogwort is good for the nitrogen in the.
Yeah. So coontail, the aquatic plant that's in the Iroquois Lake is a fine one.
Tank.
Yeah. Yep. And it's native, so that's a bonus.
One more question. Is Planktothrix heterotrophic? I mean, it grows down where there's hardly any light. Does it come up and down?
There is some evidence that they can switch between being autotrophic and heterotrophic. Yeah. And it's super cool. Like I spent way too much time talking about the cool things that cyanobacteria can do, and not nearly enough time talking about how we should be worried about them. But they just have developed all of these fascinating things, fascinating ways of being in the world.
Where is your laboratory?
So our office is in Troy.
In Troy. Okay.
Yep.
So this must be so devastating, like to a summer camp or something that depends on it. And then they get this bloom and they call out somebody from DEC, you said, reported, and it's really maybe DEC that comes to test right away, or and then
the health department actually will take samples. Yep.
Okay. And then these processes you talked about, maybe aerating and mixing and copper and other things, are those private companies that come in and do that work, when, say, a summer camp or something? Okay.
So there's often a long lag period between discovering that you have a cyanobacteria problem and starting the mitigation, because it can often be very expensive. And so, if you're doing a whole lake, millions of dollars. And so you'll like hire a consultant, and you'll go through the permitting process and all sorts of things. And one of the things that you run into is the kind of cost benefit analysis of whether or not it will, one of the things that they did at Moreau, which was really fascinating, was this kind of structured decision-making process where they went through and very explicitly laid out, like, here are our values, here are our goals, keeping people safe, big goal, allowing people to recreate, big goal. And so, determining which actions they could take that would further those goals. And so one of the reasons that we were out there doing that sediment core is because there was a kind of critical uncertainty about what was causing the cyanobacteria blooms. And that's often the case. It's difficult to pin down one cause that could have one solution. And so, it's a difficult conundrum, to be sure. Yes, John.
Yeah, Sabina, what technologies do water treatment plants use to remove the taste and odor or harmful effects?
This is for sure not my area of expertise. There's this is actually the last speaker sort of went through some of the processes. Filtration is a big one. So filtration and flocculation of the cells to settle them out. Ideally intact is what they try to do, because if the cells burst, then they can release the toxins that were contained intracellularly. And so, that does the majority of what you would need to do in order to remove those cells and toxins from the drinking water. There's also the active carbon filtration and other things that I know people do to get at the toxins, but boiling doesn't really do anything for cyanotoxins. And UV doesn't really. Yeah. So it does it for some of the toxins, but for some it does not. Like they're persistent little others.
Thank you.
Especially the microsystems. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I feel a little bit like I did after our tick presentation, where I didn't want to go outside.
Yeah. Sorry.
And now I'm a little hesitant about all these places.
So one thing that I will say, one thing that I will say is that one of the preeminent cyanobacteria, okay, I probably shouldn't say this. One of Ingrid Chorus, who's one of the like grandmothers of cyanotoxin research, it is also a proponent of, like, she has done a whole bunch of research on cyanobacteria toxins, and now she's doing like a little bit more research on what we're losing by closing beaches too soon, and that kind of like joy of recreation and health of life for things that are not that risky. So right now in New York, we do have if you see a bloom, they will often close a beach and post it without testing for toxins. And that's, one of the reasons is that testing for toxins is expensive, and the results take a while. And by the time you have the results, the conditions have changed, kind of similar to, fecal coliform testing. But yeah, so that's there is still joy to be had in recreating in lakes.
Oh, thank you for that. It is fascinating also that each state differs so much in their thresholds and their guidelines. And where does New York come in the large scheme of things with their guidelines compared to, say,
somewhere in the
Arkansas?
middle, largely more conservative than Arkansas, but there are several states that just don't even have guidelines, and many states have kind of fallen. So New York used to have like a chlorophyll A threshold, a chlorophyll A due to cyanobacteria threshold that they were using to determine risk. But now they've actually stepped back from that and are doing just if it's green, then we'll post it. Yeah.
Well, any last minute burning questions before we wrap it up? Yeah, John.
I don't have a question. I just want to say it is really delightful to see somebody who has such a good time doing their work.
I second that.
Thank
It
you.
really is. And
I am very, very lucky to get to do what I
think this is like most of life, that the more you know about it, the more complex and the more very gray areas there are. And so much of the public nowadays wants very simple answers that they can understand in 30 seconds. And this was really an excellent presentation of something that is so complex.
Yeah.
So thank you so
I
much.
told you we weren't going to understand it after an hour.
Well, I understand a lot more about it, which is great. A little more vocabulary.
Good.
So I'm going to go back and we're going to post this on our website. And thank you for all the information that you put on that too. Probably tomorrow it'll be posted up there with our Zoom speakers, or actually whenever Julian's back in the office, maybe Monday. Let me just tell everybody that our next speaker will be March 19th. Again, that's the third Thursday, 7 o'clock. And she's going to talk about glaciers, and her research is in Greenland and Antarctica. So that also should be very fascinating. Glaciers in a warming climate, and her name is Sarah Child. So, well, thank you again, Sabina. This was just really, really interesting and informative.
My pleasure, Sarah. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Everybody have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.